The Blood Ravens looked down on and despised the cowardly, skulky methods of warfare that the Dark Eldar employed. Still, these vile Xenos posed a sufficient threat to the system and had to be dealt with. It was time to give them a taste of their own tactics. The Space Marines struck their moon base with force, and the element of surprise, routing the Blackheart Cabal and rendering them a non-threat to Imperial forces. Of the Space Marines recovered from the torture grounds and slave chambers, many had been so tortured or mutilated that they were no longer fit for service. Still, undergoing these privations was no dishonor in the eyes of the brothers Space Marines, and they were sent out directly for medical treatment and inquisitorial review. Having been fully briefed on the recent Eldar interference on Lorne 5 and in the conflict over Cronus, Force Commander Indrict Boreal kept a wary eye on the armies of Farseer Keris, although he might have made a cautious ally of the stern Eldar leader in other circumstances. Boreal did not hesitate to attack her stronghold in the Upper Wastes when the opportunity presented itself, in order to ensure the Blood Raven's complete subjugation of the Kaurava system. Boreal knew that in a direct attack, he was facing a shrewd tactician whose instincts and battlefield wisdom might well exceed his own. Nevertheless, he had full faith in his Marines to overpower and outmaneuver the Eldar at every opportunity. The gamble paid off, and the Blood Ravens took the day. The Space Marines found evidence suggesting an Eldar presence in the Upper Wastes that was surprisingly ancient. However, other than a small number of supply caches, the base consisted of very little, as the Eldar relied heavily on their webway. To Commander Indric Boreal's company of intrepid Blood Ravens, the Nanyonoi moonbase's reliance on defense, unholy technology, and indirect fire were anathema to all they stood for. To defeat such an enemy was to prove, in Boreal's mind, that the superiority of his men could conquer all. Of course, the Tau saw their defeat differently. The tragic loss of a revered ethereal and famed military commander was interpreted after the fact as a failure to employ sufficiently rigorous methods. Having little use for static defenses, Boreal left only enough men as were required to hold their conquest. No more. The commander thought that once he had claimed the Kaurava system for the Imperium, the moon would make a fine depot for the Adeptus Mechanicus. The famed soldiers of the Blood Ravens chapter were no strangers to the dread Necron legions. However, unlike the vast underground labyrinth they had fought on Cronus, the Space Marines here found a vast and terrible city buried in the sands of the Emosan coast. Vast energy conduits pulsed beneath their feet, feeding power to a host of monoliths and a cold, lifeless army. Commander Boreal had been ready for all this. What he had not counted on was having to face a manifestation of the Catan god, the Great Deceiver. But even this ancient menace could not keep the Blood Ravens from victory. Their deeds that day would be scribed and illuminated in the Imperium histories for perpetuity. Afterwards, the Space Marines spent several days combing the sands of Emosa, destroying every last Necron before leaving the area to special demolition crews. Taking a lesson from the Cronus War, every suspicious stretch of the coast was repeatedly detonated to ensure against further Necron awakenings. In terms of fighting orcs, the Blood Ravens found as great a challenge in the Rocklaw Mountains as any they had ever faced. First was the difficulty in assailing the mountain stronghold itself. Second were the tactics of the infamous war boss Gorguts, whose prowess grew greater with every campaign he fought and survived. As great as the challenge was, the Blood Ravens proved themselves matchless soldiers, undaunted by any foe. After overcoming the Orc hordes and laying waste to their ancient enclave, the Space Marines proceeded to hunt down every last Orc they could find in those mountains. There was only one blemish in the Space Marines' otherwise flawless execution. Gorguts himself somehow eluded their grasp. Some reports attested to a crude rocket which took off at the battle's end, while others claim the blast was a timed bomb, closing off a tunnel entrance to cover the Great Orc's escape.